In Haiti, the state funeral of assassinated President Jovenel Moïse was held at his private residence amid heavy security. Dozens of civilians were killed and injured in an ambush by suspected Allied Democratic Forces rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo's North Kivu province. At least 146 Palestinians were injured by Israeli occupation troops who violently repressed the protests in the West Bank village of Betia on Friday. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Haiti, where the state funeral of assassinated President Jovenel Moïse was held at his private residence amid heavy security. Foreign diplomats and Haitian politicians attended the funeral as the country continues to suffer protests and instability. The flag-covered coffin of the president was brought onto a central stage lined with white curtains, carried by men in military uniforms. A line of Moïse's supporters stood by the entrance shouting "Justice for Jovenel." Moïse's widow, who was seriously wounded in the attack that killed her husband and sent for treatment in the United States, spoke as part of the tributes.
On behalf of the entire presidential family, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here to pay a final tribute to my husband, Jovenel Moïse. These are dark days for the family.
At least 7 of the Colombian mercenaries involved in the killing of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse had received United States military training, according to statements by the U.S. Secretary of Defense and an extensive report published by the Washington Post. A Colombian expert spoke about Bogotá's link to the assassination.
De exportación con alta solicitud, an export product in high demand, which is essentially those thousands of Colombian soldiers, officers, etc., who over the last 20 years, specifically after Plan Colombia was implemented and Plan Patriota, which was Uribe's continuation of Plan Colombia, a hyper-militarization of the country, a doubling of the size of the military. You know, we're talking about thousands of soldiers who've been going around the world, to the United Arab Emirates, to Afghanistan, to Iraq. These are highly trained, highly disciplined soldiers.
Social movements in Colombia are speaking out against the rise of forced displacements due to surging violence in rural communities of the country. The human rights group Movimiento Ríos Vivos said that close to 100 rural residents have been forced from their homes and had to seek shelter in urban areas of the northwestern department of Antioquia. Displaced people have denounced receiving threatening letters which express intentions to act against those residents who continue to fight for the rights of their communities in the midst of the violence of irregular armed groups and the lack of state presence and control. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez urged the United States government to halt a flotilla planning to approach Cuba's territorial waters this Friday. The Cuban diplomat warned the U.S. government of plans by extremist organizations based in Florida, which he described as provocative. In his latest statements, Rodriguez rejected the recent sanctions imposed by Washington against Cuban officials under the pretext of alleged abuses against demonstrators after the disturbances of July 11th. In this sense, he pointed out that the United States government has no moral authority to make human rights claims against Cuba. Through his Twitter account, the Cuban Foreign Minister also added the government of the United States persists with a series of statements and accusations in an act of gross interference in the internal affairs of the Republic of Cuba, aimed at disturbing the constitutional order in violation of international law and our own laws. China has called for the United States to lift sanctions announced against officials of the Cuban Interior Ministry and Revolutionary Armed Forces. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Xiao Lishan stressed that the US should first and foremost examine its own human rights record instead of meddling in other countries' internal affairs and imposing sanctions. He also reiterated China's support for the Cuban government and its people and the US blockade. The latest US aggressions come following the disturbances of July 11th, which were promoted by extremist sectors in the US with the financial support of the Biden administration. The first batch of a total of 6 million syringes to be sent to Cuba by solidarity groups in the United States arrived in Havana this Friday. The first shipment of 1.7 million syringes was donated following a fundraising campaign in the US by sectors opposed to the criminal blockade imposed by their government against the Caribbean island. The Cuban government praised the gesture of solidarity, which contrasts with President Joe Biden's hypocritical discourse against the island. The syringes are vital to the continuation of Cuba's vaccination program, using its own jabs, developed thanks to its advanced scientific development, even in the face of the limitations imposed by the US blockade, which has been tightened in the midst of the pandemic.
We reaffirm our gratitude to the Cuba Solidarity Movement in the United States, who have called for solidarity, love, and the elimination of the blockade, for making possible a successful fundraising campaign for the purchase of 6 million syringes. Cuba recognizes these humanitarian gestures, which are of great value at the present time.
Poverty continues to grow in Brazil amid the devastating pandemic, with the most vulnerable and underprivileged sectors of society ignored by the far-right government of Jair Bolsonaro. Activists have worked to fill the voids in many neighbourhoods of Rio de Janeiro, intensifying their aid campaigns, providing food and clothes to those suffering the lack of social assistance and welfare plans. Experts estimate up to 40 million Brazilians are currently living under the poverty line, a figure that continues to grow with the application of free-for-all neoliberal policies and the economic crisis, which has deepened due to the coronavirus health crisis, which has left many unemployed and dependent on charity and donations just to get by on a daily basis. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Dozens of civilians were killed and another 8 injured in an ambush by suspected Allied Democratic Forces rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo's North Kivu province. According to the authorities, the ambush took place late Thursday along a main road. The civilians were travelling in a truck heavily laden with food, which overturned during the attack. Bodies still lay on the roadside on Friday, and the injured were being evacuated to nearby medical facilities. According to the Catholic Church in the country, the Allied Democratic Forces rebel group has massacred around 6,000 civilians since 2013.
The vehicle was on the other side when we heard the gunfire and threw ourselves into the forest. We intervened to help our troops based here, but we lost our Congolese compatriots, who were passengers in that truck with their merchandise. But thankfully, we were able to also save the injured in that truck in the ambush carried out by the ADF and its allies.
A majority of lawmakers in Sierra Leone have voted to abolish the death penalty. Capital punishment in the West African state will be replaced with life imprisonment or a minimum 30-year jail term for crimes such as murder or mutiny. No execution has taken place in the country since 1998, and death sentences have often been commuted. However, the country, which is still recovering after decades of civil war, has frequently come under fire from rights groups for keeping capital punishment on the books. During a lively debate in Parliament on Friday, Matthew Nyuma, the parliamentary leader of the ruling Sierra Leone People's Party, urged MPs to vote for abolition to meet international best practice. The vote comes as the use of capital punishment has been falling across the African continent, and more countries have been outlawing the practice. A Nigerian court this Friday jailed 10 pirates for 12 years each over the hijacking of a merchant vessel last year. This is the second trial under a new anti-piracy law in which the pirates, all of them Nigerian, were convicted of hijacking a Chinese merchant ship in the Gulf of Guinea in 2020. Kidnap attacks against ships for ransom have become more common in the area, which runs from Senegal to Angola, taking in the southwest coast of Nigeria. Only last year, the Gulf of Guinea accounted for more than 95% of all maritime kidnappings.
Nigeria is trying this matter based on the new Anti-Piracy Act. And this is one of the landmark decisions taken to signify the seriousness of Nigeria to fight against piracy in our international waters. This judgment today will send a message to international community that Nigeria law is not a respecter of any criminal flying in our waters, or rather in international waters within the coast of Guinea.
Energy and environment ministers from the group of 20 rich nations failed to agree on the wording of a key climate change commitment in their final communiqué, delaying its presentation on Friday. The G20 meeting was seen as a decisive step ahead of the UN climate talks set to take place in 100 days' time in Glasgow, Scotland. The failure to agree to common language ahead of that gathering is seen as a setback to hopes of securing a meaningful accord in Scotland. One of the sticking points was phasing out coal power, which most countries wanted to achieve by 2025, but some argued would be impossible for them. The other problem concerned the wording surrounding a 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius limit on global temperature increases that was set by the Paris Agreement.
The only two topics we didn't agree, and I'm saying this because it's better to be clear, are points that also a person who is not doing this job understands. For a country with that kind of economy and 1.5 billion of citizens in this moment, it is very difficult to accelerate. It is not a coincidence that the countries that are opposing an acceleration are very big countries.
Has called on the United Kingdom's government to increase its domestic climate action and diplomacy ahead of the country hosting the climate change conference of the parties later this year. Protesters gathered at Parliament Square in the capital, London, to mark 100 days to go until the conference, while accusing Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Chancellor Rishi Sunak of failing to adopt measures on the critical issue of climate change, both internationally and at home. The British government is facing a threat of legal action over plans to allow exploration at the Cambo oil field in the North Sea off Scotland, after promising to put an end to new oil exploration licences that do not fit with the UK's climate goals. The climate conference is scheduled to be held in the Scottish city of Glasgow in October. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned of Western moves to create a belt of instability around Russian territory. Lavrov stressed that Western powers are using Belarus and Moldova in particular as part of efforts to force Russia's closest neighbours to make a choice. Either you are with the West or you are with the Russian Federation. He noted that these powers want to control the territory around Russia, both militarily and economically, and to surround it in order to apply further pressure. Exactly this policy was used in Ukraine, and in recent months, the West tried to test coup methods in Belarus, with the United States and EU countries also launching a geopolitical struggle for Moldova, the minister recalled. Works are ongoing to restore Russia's famous Trans-Siberian railway service, which has been inoperative since a bridge collapsed under heavy rain east of Lake Baikal in southern Siberia. No injuries were reported from the collapse. However, dozens of trains are obstructed on the railroad line that spans 10,000 kilometers through 8 time zones, covering Russia west to east from Moscow to Vladivostok. President Vladimir Putin announced that authorities will have a section of the system functioning again within 2 to 3 days, while full operations are expected to resume in less than a week. Measures are being taken to provide for the affected passengers and crew with food and essential items. The railway service is vital to business, communications and everyday life.
I would like to ask the government to deal with it in the most serious way. Life necessities must be provided, including food and everything necessary for enterprises, operation and city services. Minister of Emergency Services and the head of the Russian Railways have just reported that the first line is due to be repaired in 2 or 2.5 days, the second one in 5 days.
In China, at least 51 people have been killed and 8 more are missing due to floods in the central province of Henan. The natural disaster has affected an area home to more than 3 million inhabitants, 400,000 of whom were evacuated. The direct economic damages are estimated at more than $180 million. The Chinese government has allocated a fund of $15 million to begin the rescue and recovery efforts. 36 people have been killed in landslides caused by monsoon rains in western India. The numbers were made public by the authorities on Friday. Local officials also reported that at least 40 people are believed to be trapped, as rescue efforts are still underway. The Navy and Air Force have joined the rescue, but their operations have been hampered by landslides blocking roads, including the main highway between Mumbai and Goa. India's Met Department has issued red alerts for several regions, warning that heavy rainfall will continue for the next few days. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. At least 146 Palestinians were injured by Israeli occupation troops who violently repressed the protests in the West Bank village of Betia on Friday. Occupation forces used tear gas, rubber bullets and live ammunition against Palestinians who marched near the outpost of Eviata, taken from locals by the occupying Zionist regime in May, and where another illegal Israeli settlement is being established, in clear defiance of international law. The latest move has the support of the far-right government of Naftali Bennett, who continues the aggressive policy of his predecessor, having agreed with the settlers to preserve the stolen Palestinian territories by placing them under military supervision. "13 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails continue their hunger strike against a Zionist policy of administrative detention. The 13 Palestinians held by Israel under arbitrary administrative detention orders without charges or trial in the Negev detention camp, in addition to the Ramon and Ofra prisons, are demanding to be released. Administrative detention is based on allegations that a person plans to commit a future offence. It has no time limit and the evidence on which it's based is not disclosed. The Israeli regime employs this measure extensively and routinely and has used it to hold thousands of Palestinians for lengthy periods of time as political prisoners. The United Kingdom has spent £350 million on promoting regime change in Syria, according to an investigative report. A controversial UK government body known as the Conflict Stability and Security Fund has used large amounts of money from the British aid budget to support so-called opposition forces and projects in terrorist-held areas in Syria. The Classified UK, which investigates British foreign policy, revealed that project documents show British aid has been used for years in areas of Syria where extremist groups are prevalent. The UK funding to Syrian rebel groups began in 2011. The aid projects have coincided with a British covert programme to overthrow the Syrian government and install a pro-Western regime, undertaken with its allies in the United States, the Gulf states and Turkey, from where some of the UK-funded projects have been run. "70% of the population in Lebanon is at risk of running out of drinking water, according to a recent UNICEF report. The country's economic crisis now poses a direct threat to human life, as a limited few can access the precious resource. The crisis has had a critical impact on fuel and electricity reserves, and now water supplies are endangered due to the high maintenance costs of the distribution system, which are paid in US dollars, the currency that has been the downfall of the Lebanese pound's value. Meanwhile, political powers in Beirut struggle to reach a consensus on the situation as the crisis deepens. A batch of Chinese COVID-19 vaccines arrived in Myanmar on Thursday as the country battles a devastating surge in cases. Myanmar has been in turmoil since the military ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi earlier this year, and the latest wave of the pandemic has struck with many hospitals empty of medical staff. The Chinese shipment contained over 700,000 Sinopharm vaccine doses. The military junta that currently rules the country has purchased 4 million vaccines from China, while announcing that Beijing will donate a further 2 million. Authorities reported almost 7,000 new cases on Wednesday, up from around 100 per day in early June. The Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, received a second dose of the country's domestically produced Coviran Barakat vaccine on Friday. The Supreme Leader had previously stressed that he would only be vaccinated if it was with an Iranian-produced shot, not a foreign vaccine. For that reason, when the first phase of the vaccination campaign began for Iranians aged 80 and over, he did not receive the foreign vaccine then being administered, but waited for the Iranian-made jab. The Coviran Barakat vaccine was approved for emergency use by the country's health ministry earlier this month. Vietnam's army is working to disinfect the streets of Ho Chi Minh City, the country's commercial capital, as it sees a rise in the number of COVID-19 infections. Soldiers have started spraying disinfectants on the streets, especially in areas with the highest transmission of the coronavirus. 2 groups of 16 special-use military vehicles will work to disinfect 2 districts per day over the next week. The city has been under lockdown since July 9th, but the outbreak has not yet been contained. Local authorities have extended the measure for another 2 weeks with stricter restrictions. French hospitals are preparing for an expected surge in COVID-19 cases in the second half of August caused by the 4th wave of the pandemic. The French government's top advisor on COVID-19 warned on Friday that a new variant of the disease would probably emerge in the winter months this year. The country is currently battling an unprecedented spike in new cases caused by the more infectious Delta variant, which was first recorded in India. Around 56% of the French population has received at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, with 46% having had both. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. Plus, you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.